came into this weekend in a standoff with Apple, but they've now approved at least one version of the app. How did that happen?
So I sent out a couple of tweets late Friday afternoon, and at 9 p.m. Central Time, Friday night, they sent us a note back on the App Store saying, we've read your tweets, we're allowing the bug fixes that we held back to be released, and we look forward to working with you. So we were, of course, very happy to see that all these bug fixes that we were eager to get out to customers were being released. But obviously, Apple also made it clear that this wasn't over yet. So we parsed Phil Schiller, the VP at Apple, who's responsible for the App Store's comments to the press about what we had to do to get a definitive approval to exist in the App Store without the threat of being kicked out. And we made those changes over the weekend. And on this morning, we pushed those changes for approval. And that update, which adds a new free temporary anonymized service to the app, such that people can download the app and immediately use it for something, as well as the acceleration of our Hey for Work product that exists in the same app. We've rolled that out to a couple of companies. So that's now pending approval. It's been in review, as Apple calls it, since this morning. And we very much look forward to hopefully getting that approval. But again, all the power is in Apple's hands. They could decide any minute now to not approve our latest updates and essentially send us back to square one.
Now, part of the contention is the 30% fee that you would have to pay Apple, which is part of their generally standard policy. This is something that you don't want to pay. So if approved, would you have to pay that?
Absolutely not. We drew a clear red line saying we're never going to submit to a 30% shakedown of our business. And Apple seems to have accepted that. The 102 release that they allowed us to push out did not have in-app payments. We have said repeatedly we were never going to do in-app payments, and we are going to hold our ground on that. But there are other things that Apple can make us do that we will do for them if that's what they ask for. The rules seem to change quite frequently. There's a lot of unwritten rules that we thought we were all following. But now there's a new set of invitations, perhaps, if you will, from Phil Schiller to add these things like the free plan that you can try it out with and have the app work for the multi-user corporate version as well. So we're going to try those things. We're never going to give Apple 30% of our revenue. We went so far as to explore all the legal options that we had. And even though we spoke with several law firms last Friday about our case, and most of them agreed that we have a strong case, it just doesn't matter that much, because even if you win your case, you're going to be 10 years into the future, and Apple will have crushed your business in the meantime. So we really are at the mercy of Apple here, and hopefully Apple sees this as a wake-up call to be more fair, to be more transparent about what goes on in the App Store, and hopefully regulators see this too, that Apple has tremendous gatekeeper power, and the software makers like ours have to be on iPhones and iPads to be competitive. So we can't really just negotiate with Apple. Apple sets essentially all the terms, and we're left to merely comply. Well, I think we sparked up a storm here, because we perhaps were one of the first developers who said, no, you can't just come on a bug fix update and ask us for 30% of our revenue. That's completely unreasonable. And we've heard for countless developers telling us that they've been shaken in much the same ways. So this is not just a Apple v. Hey, this is a structural and fundamental issue with the App Store.
Okay. So let me just point out Apple's position here, because they say they're trying to create a level playing field. The vast majority of apps in the App Store don't make any money for Apple, and yet Apple services them. You do speak to some developers who acknowledge that this cut that Apple takes is kind of the cost of doing business for the promotion that Apple might give them, the processing of the fees, and yet you do have companies like Netflix, like Dropbox, that don't pay these fees. And so the contention is that Apple, while it has these rules, enforces them inconsistently. What do you think a better policy would be?
Well, first of all, give developers the choice as to whether they want to opt into Apple's payment system. There are many benefits to Apple's payment systems for certain type of applications. Apple already has the customer's credit card on file. They make it incredibly easy for customers to spend money in these applications. And if you're a kind of application that benefits from that, that's fine. Okay, do it. 30% still is outrageous. And if you look at other app stores that do not have a dominant position, such as the Windows App Store that charges 5%, or some of these gaming stores that actually have competition that charge 10 or 12%, you can see what competition does. It lowers the price. We're saying, give us the choice. We would not have opted into Apple's payment system. We don't want to pay 30%. We pay between 1.8 and 2.4% to process credit cards. We bring our own customers for our kind of service. Apple's marketing doesn't do anything for us. We're not asking Apple for freebies or favors here. And in fact, we already pay Apple for the right to publish on the iOS platform. Apple charges all developers $100 a year, which today goes quite a long way to cover basic things like traffic and storage. And if Apple wanted to charge us a fee to get an approval, we'd be happy to pay that as well. The 30% is just completely outrageous, and it can't be the deal that they force down everyone's throat.
Meantime, speaking of regulation, the EU has opened 2 antitrust investigations into the App Store, into Apple Pay. You've also got U.S. lawmakers, the House Antitrust Subcommittee, looking into big tech, including Apple. Take a listen to what Congressman and the chair of that committee, David Cicilline, told us about how he views Apple's App Store policies.
This is very concerning that the use of the App Store, developers who are startups are basically being forced to pay a ransom of 30%, or they are denied access to that marketplace. And, it's just coincidentally, Google and Apple arrive at the same thing, a third of the profit. And that sort of market power is very disturbing. If in fact it were done the way, in a competitive market, you might have a percentage as low as 2 or 3%, the way it is with credit cards. Even the credit card market is not really competitive, but it's still 2 or 3%. This is 30%. This is highway robbery.
David, what's your take on this antitrust scrutiny, given that, to be fair, Apple is not the most dominant mobile platform in the world, it's Android?
Well, that depends on how you read it. Either they're part of a duopoly and they share this with Google, but there are many ways to slice this market. For our kind of product, which is $100 a year for premium email services, Apple is absolutely the dominant marketplace. If you look at all the research into where North American consumers spend most money on apps and services, it's with Apple. Apple has the lion's share of that marketplace. So they already have a monopoly position within that. But I also think that Chairman Cicilline is absolutely right, that this is highway robbery. I testified in front of his committee in January on this exact issue with the App Store. This was well before we had any heat from Apple on this issue. I was simply observing what was going on. I was listening to developers and saying, this is not right. This is classic antitrust, exploitive, and abusive behavior, and it needs to be stopped. So I'm really glad that Chairman Cicilline's commission is looking into this. I'm really glad that the EU announced their investigations. It just so happened that the crazy timing was that the day we got denied from Apple and they threatened to kick us out of the App Store was literally the day that the EU announced these investigations. So it's high time that Apple is being investigated for their antitrust abuse, and hopefully something good comes of that. We're just trying to survive in the meantime, because if the firefighters show up to our business 3-4 years from now and Apple kicked us out of the App Store, well, we will have burned to the ground. There'll be rubble and daffodils. That's not what I want for our 56 employees. That's not what I want for our customers.
Quite a metaphor, David. Apple has opened up iOS now. As of today, they're opening up iOS to third-party mail apps. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, there's so many things here where the timing just seems incredible. We've been working on our Hey email system for 2 years. We've invested millions of dollars into the development. So for all of this to come together in just 2 weeks, it's incredible. But I'm really glad to see that. Like, Apple makes great products. I've been an Apple fan. I've been an Apple evangelist for 20 years. It pains my heart that I'm now under the thumb of Apple after promoting them and advocating for them, because they do great things in a lot of different areas. They do great things with privacy. They do great things with their products. We're developers. We want to make Apple's platform better. We dug the moat for Apple. They now sit with this gleaming castle that's worth $1.55 trillion. And in the letter of rejection to us, they told us, hey, you haven't been paying us for 8 years. The wallet is or the envelope is a little thin. Where's our money? Come on, Apple. We're making this platform for you. Okay. Developers are what created the moat for the iOS monopoly that you enjoy and profit from.